Welcome to the Rethinking Trauma and Transition podcast. And today we are delighted to have Claire Lilly, the driving force behind the Forceful Protocol.
Thank you so much for joining us, Claire. I think we started talking probably a couple of months ago when you were sharing the progress that was happening with the Forceful Protocol, and that there was potentially going to be a meeting down in London at the House of Parliament to launch this. And Rich and I were very fortunate that you extended an invitation to us to come along and support that. So we're really pleased to have you on, because I think it's something that needs to be talked about and shared. People need to know that this is out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for coming.
So in terms of the Forceful Protocol, I suppose it would seem sensible for you to give us a bit of an overview to share that with everybody so that they understand what the driving force behind that protocol is, what it serves and what purpose it's there for, and the intention behind it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no sort of real short answer, but I'll do my best. So the Forceful Protocol is a veteran suicide prevention policing strategy. Bit of a mouthful. Right. So in 2020, actually prior to 2020, my son's father, my former husband and good friend Alan Forsyth, took his own life to suicide in 2020. But prior to that, he had kind of a 19 year period where, as a family, we were sort of watching this potential train wreck play out. And sadly, Alan completed suicide during the lockdown of 2020, as I mentioned, from which we held an inquest, and my legal team and I, rather than sort of go in with a blame mentality, we wanted to highlight flaws within the veteran welfare landscape and Alan's particular care pathway, and do a change, this, that and that and that. And as it transpired, quite a few things kind of come up naturally. I'm part of a group called For the Fallen, and there's over 100 members of families bereaved by military suicide, many of which I've become very close friends with. Mm-hmm. And this sort of CIC, if you like, was founded by Joe Dukes. And the members basically we obviously all get talking and share stories and that kind of stuff. And then eventually kind of the inquest for them and their loved ones sort of played out, and we kind of obviously compared notes, and it sort of transpired that there was a consistent theme throughout in terms of the veteran's story. So we highlighted basically that there was limited information that was accessible for the police to gather in terms of intelligence, in terms of risk assessments for veterans specifically. And I don't want to single off veterans into their own sort of mental health genre, but the other part of the story here is there is actually a lot in place for a veteran. And so to sort of make that pathway easier to navigate for the veteran, their families, their friends, that their case workers in whatever field that may be, whether that's probation work, drug and alcohol counselling, someone like you, as well as sort of your op courages and your VTILs and your SAFA and the British and all of that, who predominantly have got a good grasp, but it hasn't sort of really filtered down to the other levels, that are the boots on the ground, if you like, that sort of constant interaction with the veteran, because the veteran can be involved in any one of those at a whole given time. So it's important that the communication is there. So going back to the police, we also sort of highlighted that Alan was missing over a period of 3 days, during which 11 different police officers were involved with sort of shift changes, and it became apparent really that they weren't particularly veteran trauma informed, let alone sort of knew about sort of referral care pathways, if you like, and why Alan was a severity, because when I phoned them initially, I was saying, he is drug and alcohol dependent. He has tried to take his own life. He's been in and out of combat stress. They've had a serious service redesign. His funding's been cut, so he's essentially done 3 years and then kind of got not really a lot in place. Mm-hmm. Then, he'd had a close friend sort of die. He'd been in and out of prison. He had a drug and counsellor and a probation worker, and if you were veteran trauma informed, it was a very worrying conversation to be having.
Yeah.
But in the police's defence, they have a lot of missing persons every day. Not all those who wander are lost. They're entitled to some anonymity and create a new life, if you like. But their role is to get that risk assessment right. And as I've said before, it is the difference between a medium risk and a high risk. Alan was only ever medium risk, and there is a big difference there in terms of whether the choppers go up and what the cameras are flagged and that sort of stuff, and whether the dogs go out indeed. So that's kind of really how it came about. And in the internal investigation from the police pre-inquest, there was a form I had it all printed off in paper format, and there was a form called the Herbert Protocol, and it hadn't been completed. And in my naivety, I thought, well, why hasn't this been filled out? That's a flaw, crossing the police sort of sector. But it actually transpired that it was actually for missing Alzheimer's patients. So I'm like, well, why isn't there something like that for veterans? So essentially, that's where the Forcer Protocol was kind of born, if you like, and that was something solicitors sort of pushed forward for me in the inquest, to potentially go into a prevention of future deaths report. But what the coroner did was actually she did a narrative conclusion. Alan's passing wasn't classed as a suicide, but within that narrative conclusion there was a list of sort of stipulations be taken on board by the various different departments. And then from there, I'd been in comms with Johnny Mercer anyway, reference Alan's passing and stuff, and he'd been in and out of the seat, as Defence Minister.
Yeah.
They were changing government, and then he'd come back in as Cabinet Defence Minister, which is really good. And from there, I reached out to various different people sort of on LinkedIn, like Jim Jones from Greater Manchester Police, who's, and they are kind of GMP are the darlings of the military policing community and the work that they do with the Army Covenant. And then I reached out to a guy called Alan Rees-Cooper for the National Police Chiefs Council. Jim Jones put me in contact with Veteran Strategical Lead. I've probably got that title wrong, so sorry, Mark, if you listen to this. That guy has been beyond proactive, and I mean, I say all my speeches, he deserves to be treasured within the force, as does Jim Jones, and
they do.
That are passionate about veterans. They are the what a police officer should be, in character, in terms of integrity. And so from there we've just building. We've been having since January two weekly Teams meetings facilitated by a lady within TVP, and various entities have come in, NHS, psychiatrists, different sort of areas. Because the other thing to sort of, which is kind of always my key message, is that due to the fragmented nature of the veteran welfare landscape, it's imperative that we have a multi-sector approach. And and so when we sort of got into Parliament, and Mark Francois kindly, bless him, as former Defence Minister and my local MP, facilitated this meeting in Parliament, we brought everyone to the table, from your third sectors to the Home Office to the National Police Chiefs Council, various different police entities, NHS, psychiatrists, psychologists, professors. They were all in the room, and you need that kind of cross-sector approach. So that's kind of how we got there. It was it's been really sad, but it's also been really, really cathartic in many ways. And I mean, I worked for the military for 16 years side by side. I worked for the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment, so I always had a good understanding of military life and to a degree how their minds, their mental makeup and the things that they'd endured. I mean, I saw them sort of returning, guys that had come back from the tail ends of Kosovo and Ireland, and then some of my lads going out to Iraq and Afghanistan, and the onset of the issues there. And what's been really, really nice about this as well is the amount of private messages that I've been getting from veterans and serving people, because something like this obviously is a very practical sort of well-needed strategy, but it also lets them know that people care, not that the members of the government and within the MOD don't care, but they need to feel, that they've got a route to take. And there is so much out there. There is a lot out there for veterans, but the platform for that is not necessarily there. It's not necessarily broadcast, or detailed.
It's very disjointed. There's really good places to transition into the civilian life. Parts that some counties are absolutely outstanding at this, and others not so much. And it's finding out people like, you have an armed forces champion within the Department of Work and Pensions, within the county councils. 61
of them, in fact,
Yeah. And how many people, when they're leaving service, know about this? Not many. There's one guy who I put a message on and goes, I know the local one, but he hadn't thought about telling anybody else because maybe he thinks everybody else knows about it when they don't. So it's information like this is vital to get out to people as well.
And I think for me, that's what was so powerful about London, was seeing how many people were joining the dots on this and looking to streamline access to this, to simplify access to this, because sometimes that disjointedness can in itself be a major issue and barrier, because it just puts pressure and overwhelm in an already crisis situation when you've got to access support and help through multiple different routes, time after time after time.
Yeah, and I mean, the beauty of, so within the Teams meetings, a guy called Alan Rees-Cooper put me in contact with a guy called Charlie Hedges, who's actually a missing persons expert in every genre possible. And him and his team had created Safe and Found online, and the Herbert Protocol was only ever in paper format. So when a patient went missing, it was literally up to sort of the family member to hand a hard copy over to the police officer with all the information on. Charlie's sort of working, and the team working really hard to sort of digitalise that, and they have uploaded that now on the Safe and Found online website. Perhaps we could put the website for that on there as well. I mean, the Herbert Protocol itself is based on a guy called George Herbert. He was a former veteran incidentally himself and ended up suffering with Alzheimer's, and as is, again within the veteran community, that is could potentially sort of happen to them. They could be diagnosed like that. So Charlie, bless him, created, and the team created the Forcer Protocol, but on that, and within that protocol, obviously it's an online version, and obviously it's going to take time to build that website and get all the people on. We've got people signing up as we speak, which is incredible. But if they're not on there, the same questions within there would be asked by the police in the first instance when they do sort of their risk assessments and stuff of the call handler or any potential people when they're gathering their intelligence along the way, any services that they've been involved in, description, and they're very similar in nature to the Herbert Protocol, but there's certain questions that are actually unique to the veteran service community. So that's sort of the online form. And then so what also makes the Forcer Protocol unique is the actual referral care pathway afterwards. And we're predominantly going to use sort of Op Nova and Op Courage, but in the instance of the eventuality of a suicide, if that veteran has family members or children, something like Scotty's Little Soldiers, we're kind of advocating that the police officers, when they go and give that awful message or deliver that awful message to the family, that there's help in place for the children in terms of veteran-specific brief and that stuff. And I mean, when I go round and do my talks region to region, I advocate to all police forces, because obviously you've got 43 different regions, but within that, say within Met, you've got I think it's 11. I mean, don't quote me on that, within that one, so that it's so fragmented as it is within the NHS as well. So I sort of advocate kind of familiarising yourself with, the breakfast clubs local to you, the sports clubs that, are local to you. For me, those kinds of charities, if you like, or CICs, like Phoenix's Heroes, for instance. My son Josh, he was made a honorary captain of Phoenix's Heroes because Josh and Alan used to fish together, and Josh is huge fisherman anyway, crazy about fish. And he was made an honorary captain by them, and Josh now coaches veterans with PTSD and various other, life circumstances, and that, they're out in nature, they're all together, and it's sort of inadvertent therapy, but the veteran also feels like that they're leading a normal life and doing something that's constructive. And I think there's only so much value in, not that I'm discouraging this in any way, but there's only so much value in getting a diagnosis, being prescribed some medication. You kind of need, and obviously employment and housing.
It's all about moving on, Claire, isn't it?
So say that again, sorry.
It's all about moving on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not being stuck with that diagnosis.
Feeling normal and enjoying life, and there's every opportunity within an environment like that to actually laugh, and not necessarily even talk, because that person has a natural empathy. And I mean, that was one thing that we found with Alan. I mean, he encountered sort of 20 different people at one point, and he had to from start to finish, explain, where he'd been, what he'd encountered, that level of trauma, and he saw some horrendous things, and it was almost this repetition of trauma, and it was exhausting for him.
And that in itself re-traumatizes. It adds to it. It doesn't help, it adds to it.
And I want to, make myself perfectly clear. I mean, obviously, I'm not advocating don't talk, but I think there's how much talking like that helps, and the external services could alleviate that for the veteran and pass that information across and have an information share agreement, particularly if that, the veteran is deeply traumatized.
I would underline that. I would agree that what we're not saying is don't talk. What we're saying is make that talk count.
Yeah,
because it's those conversations where you feel as though you're not getting any further forward, where it's just for the sake of accessing something, and there's no guarantee that you're going to actually get the service or how long it's going to take. So you've just re-traumatized and re-engaged with the issues, and there's no guarantee of any follow-on support. So that it's the outcome and the purpose of that conversation becomes undervalued.
Yeah, and it's inevitable that there's going to be a referral of some description. And I don't think necessarily a referral means, you're then taken off the books. You should always be able to return to that, whether it's in, a couple of years' time or God willing, you kind of you get your life back on track and you're equipped with yet further tools from employment charities and OpNova and, outside sort of pursuits, so... Yeah, all these land-based sort of pursuits, and I dare say you've got cycling clubs and photography groups, and that are veteran orientated, and then you've got like your breakfast clubs, as I mentioned before. They are fundamental and key, and they have their own networks within networks, and they might notice something different that either, dare I say, OpNova or Courage haven't noticed, like, such and such hasn't been in today, or he hasn't responded to such and such in a text message, or he's gone a bit quiet on social media if he engages in that.
Yeah.
All those things could be sort of indicative that they're kind of withdrawing. And
there's a crisis pending.
Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say, Claire, was when people do get referred to on a different organisation, another organisation, and they get labelled with being angry, they get labelled being not willing to engage, and all these other labels get attached to them when they are engaging, and then it makes the services go, well, we don't want anything to do with you because you're doing this, when they are frustrated.
And all of those kind of things like anger and drugs and alcohol addiction and misuse, they're all symptoms of PTSD as well.
Yes.
And then you factor in something like that playing out in the home where children are present, and social services could potentially get involved, that they're then being made, the mums, if you like, to make a choice, or the father being made to make a choice for the children, that particular parent needs to leave the home. So then you've got a veteran with the condition, not getting the help and support that they need, the breakdown in the marriage, having to, find somewhere else to live, and the stigma of all of that. I know that Alan felt, especially if you're kind of dishonourably or medically discharged, because obviously that transition in itself is pretty daunting, you know. Maximum help and support should and kind of is coming into place. It is getting better, don't get me wrong, but yeah, it just impacts all that trauma further. And I feel like, and you notice it, like that mentality, even within the military community and the policing community itself, that person is seen as a criminal because they've got into a fight because of the anger regulations, or it's kicked off at home because of a domestic, or, you know, they're inebriated by drugs and alcohol in an attempt to sort of self-medicate and maintain themselves. Not in any way advocating that that's the right way, but that is inevitably what happens within a percentage of this cohort. And then as a result of being inebriated, they then go on to make further poor choices. Then maybe there's a period of kind of abstinence from that, and there's guilt, shame, anger at themselves, anger at the world, you know, and yeah, so it's quite a perpetuating cycle really for some. But then I am hearing like lots of really, really positive stories of transformative work, especially under sort of Opnova, and people that were at their lowest point and their life was completely annihilated, and they're thriving in society now. So yeah, so it's not all doom and gloom, but I think particularly with my close affiliation to the veterans family set, that are I can't even speak, sorry, that are kind of have been bereaved by suicide, you know, it's kind of shit for us, excuse my French, you know, but there is potential to learn from that. And we've been engaging with sort of one is too many and Northumbria University, and feeding into a project that is all obviously hindsight based. And there's a lot of value in that, from learned and lived experiences. And I just can't, especially where the police are concerned, because they are a unique kind of entity on their own. They are bound to at some point come cross paths with a veteran. So we're encouraging, you know, ask if they're a veteran. So within GMP, obviously a lot of police forces across the country, when a veteran comes into custody now, they are asking that question, and they'll be referred to Opnova, and then on to OpCourage, etc., etc. But, you know, and GMP, as I was just going to say, have written into policy that with a missing person, they are asking that question, are they a veteran? Not because they're more important than any other genre of mental health, but because there is this referral care pathway for them, which is a win-win all round, you know. And it isn't just the veteran community that impacts. You've got a family, you've got friends, you've got a support worker. So it does actually ripple out into the community and prevent. And as I was saying about Scotty's little soldiers, that child potentially, with that level of trauma of suicide, has the potential to go off the rails. So if you, again, intercept and refer for that particular child, you are going to increase that child's...
Well, that's what we're after, isn't it? Is reducing adverse childhood experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's also about recognising that for every person lost by suicide, there are at least another 14 or 15 that are fundamentally impacted by that, whose perception and experiences of life is permanently altered, whose landscape changes, and that ripple out there is much bigger than people sometimes are aware of. But it's also about recognising that probably the most powerful tool to reduce that risk is community, but making sure that community is joined up, is easy to access, is communicating within itself to make that access as slick as possible, so that when somebody does need to reach out, does need that support and does need that help, the access route to that in itself isn't a barrier.
No, and I would say, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, that on some level it's actually a primordial requirement to be part of a community.
Utterly, yes.
Yeah.
You know, and I think maybe that's what veterans miss when they leave the military. There's that unspoken sort of affiliation and natural empathy, and you know, I suppose it would be a bit like if you lost a child or to miscarriage or something like that, and then you go into a support group with other women that have been through that without with saying very little, you naturally feel that they understand you.
Yeah.
You know, and the same within, you know, drug and alcohol and rehabilitation people that are actually reformed themselves would probably gain more respect from the clients present, knowing that that person standing in front of them has been there, has done it, and is coming through and implementing all these practices.
But I think it's you don't need as many words to say what you need to say, so that in itself becomes simpler.
Yeah, and it can be constantly trying to, because emotions, especially, you know, I dare say if you've got PTSD and CPTSD, trying to articulate exactly what it is that you're feeling, certain words don't really do the depth of that justice. So it's in trying to explain. What else? I was thinking there. So going back to the protocol, I mean, currently we've got, because obviously the pilot's in Manchester at the moment, and Vital Signs, which is the Beacon Alert page, there's currently 4 veterans outstanding and missing somewhere in the UK. And we know from the Manchester sort of university report that between 1996 and 2018, there was 1,086 suicides. So you sort of break down, and that's kind of sort of into yearly, what was that, over a period of 18, 20 years, and my maths is rubbish, that it worked out basically 1 a week somewhere in the UK. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a massive, overwhelming problem for police in terms of resources, but there are areas where veterans could be prevented and intercepted, i.e. in custody or in domestic abuse at home, or a scenario where no further action was taken. But if they were asking that question, or within the homeless community, you know, if they're constantly sort of asking that question, because they are that key central figure, you know. And we have 4 veterans currently missing, but in other parts of the UK, I mean, how high risk they are, that's not for me to comment, but you could pretty much say that they're struggling in one way, shape or form. Anyway, naturally. And
there's got to be a reason behind them going missing in the first place.
Yeah, and as we've said before, people are entitled to, you know, those who wanted a break from the ex-wife or whatever, you know, there might be like or want to start a completely new life that's separate from the military or whatever. But I suppose it's important that the police have those tools so they can ascertain exactly what that looks like for that missing person, because they are the missing persons teams. They are the experts within that field, you know. And
I think this is. I suppose this is also where that initial emergency call, when you put in that request for that welfare check, I know certainly I've had very mixed responses when on the few occasions I've had to place that call, and one in particular was incredibly worrying, because the response when I explained the circumstances and explained my level of concern and who I was, well, maybe they don't want to talk to you today.
Yeah, no, but then I think. But if like what I was saying, for instance, their key characteristic vulnerable, you know, he has CPTSD. His support for that has been dropped. We're in the middle of a lockdown, for instance, in Alan's, you know, case. Yeah. He's just come out of a relationship, so a relationship breakdown, or kind of, and you know, a recent friend of his had passed away, who was very, very close to. He is drug and alcohol dependent. You know, they're very like specific. That's a specific language that I would say that they're high risk. In my brain, you know, Alan needed to be found immediately. You know, immediately. And I think where they weren't, that particular force were not veteran trauma informed. I think that posed and I mean, you know, dare I say, an element of stigma that he was a convicted criminal.
But I think sometimes the other thing is that when you say that there are drug and alcohol issues, the automatic sometimes assumption is, oh, well, they're probably just on a bender.
Yeah.
They'll sober up and they'll be fine and they'll come home, and there's not that layering of the risk factors. Then it's almost like that starts to negate everything else instead of adding to the complexity of the picture and saying this is a risk.
Yeah, bless him. Bless him, bless him, bless him. Yeah, it's really sad actually. But I mean, I try not to sort of go down that route. I have to be very disciplined with my thought structure, and
I think
no point in thinking that. I mean, as I said in my speech, we're given the people that I know now and how the landscape works. I could have saved Alan 10 times over, and I can say that hands down.
But I think the challenge with that, Claire, is always that hindsight allows us to view things with different eyes that we didn't have at the time. That gives us that false feeling in a way, because at the time we only ever make the decisions that we are equipped to make, that are the best possible decision we can make.
Yeah, and for me, I kind of want to be able to share that experience, share these options that are out there that are, we're not going to save every suicide, not at all, and an element of that work is an inside job. But if we can kind of alleviate, financial pressures, housing issues, employment worries, clinical assessments, diagnosis, and the right kind of trauma therapy and integrate, for me, that veteran needs plan A, B, C and D all in place, all of it in place, not just one or the other through risk of,
Well, otherwise it almost becomes a sequential process, when in actual fact all you're doing is it's like a giant game of whack-a-mole, really, isn't it? Unless you treat the holistic picture and resolve holistically, then all you're doing is putting temporary plasters in place to a certain extent. There has to be that bigger picture solution.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, I'm very passionate. I mean, the word holistic, I mean, I know you kind of mean a different thing there, but things like breath work and nutrition, for instance, I mean, I'm a sound practitioner, and so when you look at like the parasympathetic nervous system in the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system, let's say, I would say a veteran that is under intense trauma is consistently in the sympathetic nervous system, that going into sympathy, adrenaline, cortisol, adrenaline. And then when you incorporate things like breath work, which is scientifically proven to regulate and alter the chemical structure of chemicals, and things like nutrition, given that of serotonin is actually made in the gut, and gut function is everything. And then you've got the connection via the vagus nerve between the heart, the brain and the gut and other organs as well. And when you look at the science behind that and getting someone into a relaxed, de-stressed state, there are lots of coping mechanisms even outside of the veteran arena that could help sort of facilitate that. I mean, I'm a massive fan of like Wim Hof, for instance. I mean, I don't know what I think of him, but that was certainly one thing that was helping Alan at one point, water therapy, and again, being in nature in one way, shape or form, whether that's out cycling or fishing or walking the dog or any of those kind of things as well and it's about putting all of those things in your toolkit. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and profess to understand the condition inside out, but what I do know is that there are various things that could be implemented, and as I say, A, B, C, D, E and F and G.
Well, I think that's one of those I suppose ironies of how our brain and our thinking works, in that fundamentally our brain seeks congruence. It likes order. So that means if we're feeling down, it will seek to replicate our environment to match our mood, and that then means that we withdraw. And yet the very thing that we need at that point in time is connection. We need that interaction to help pull us out of that, to give us that sense of belonging, sense of fit and sense of part of something. Yet our brain, trying to do its best possible for us, is seeking to find that match with mood. So it will push us to withdraw. Yet all the things that you're talking about, all of these networks, what they are is connection. They're that part of that safety net.
Yeah, and to be balanced enough and connected within yourself to actually embrace that time alone as well. That's also an important part, isn't it? Connecting with you and trusting you, and as well. So there is that. I mean, we could go off on a tangent on all that sort of stuff. Any day, I love that. But How
instrumental has Mark Francois been in assisting you with?
He's bless him. He's incredible. I mean, we've worked on various projects together before. I mean, I worked on a ride road safety. Actually, Angel's anniversary is coming up. A friend of mine's horse was hit by a car at 53 miles an hour and on a country lane. So we worked on speed reduction on country lanes, basically, and various other stuff. So Mark and I were very, familiar, if you like, in terms of MP and constituent anyway. And when Alan, he obviously knew about Alan and his struggles and being in combat stress. So we've been connected from throughout the whole process, if you like. And then obviously when the sad news hit that Alan had done what he'd done to himself, bless him, like Mark wrote to me, which was really, really lovely. And I trauma bombed him massively. I was hysterical on the phone, as you can imagine, when we had a phone conversation. But when I reached the point of, right, this is what I want to do with it, he was there. It was incredible. And, he was former veteran minister. There's like 20 years of like solid depth of knowledge there. And I think a lot of the work that he's actually done within the veteran arena has actually gone unrecognised in the public sort of sector, and within the military sector as well.
Yeah.
And then obviously we had Johnny Mercer come in as well. Bless him. He rescheduled everything that he was doing because he was supposed to have been he made it obviously to the Field of Remembrance. I think it was the opening of or something. Bless him. And, he made time within his schedule to meet Alan's parents who had come down from up north and the other families that were with us on my panel and, that have buried. Bless him. And to me, those little actions mean so much. Yeah. Really, really do. And to reschedule, to put the time, effort and compassion, whether you're a Tory lover or a Labour or cross,
I think Johnny Mercer is a bit like Marmite, isn't he? People
everyone is though, aren't they? We can't be like everyone though. But what I do know is the heart and the passion is there and the integrity where that's concerned. And I mean, they've demonstrated that time and time again for me, so, and that's what I need in my team in that particular element,
So in terms of the Forcer protocol then, Claire, we know it's now live in Greater Manchester Place. Yeah. What are the rollout plans? Because my understanding is that there's the next 6 months is really about refining and making sure that everything that needs to work and how all the pieces are connected are really, really slick, with the goal being a national rollout. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, ultimately, that's my ultimate desire, obviously, because as I said before, we've got 4 missing veterans at what risk assessment, I don't know, in various other places. Whereas if it was rolled out and you are looking at 1 a week, but what we don't know is how many veterans go missing a week, right? Yeah. So at the end of October, beginning of November, just under a 2-week time frame, there was actually 7 veterans missing in one. Various different places, and I don't think any of them were actually missing in Greater Manchester. 6 of which were found, and that sounds wonderful. It's like, thank God that they were found. But
one was,
and there was one guy, bless him, I'm not sure for legal reasons if I can mention, because obviously his inquest and things like that haven't taken, but he was found deceased in Woodland. So obviously, another tragedy. But so the force, so ideally, yes, right across the board, or to, at very least the policing community becomes veteran trauma informed, that they ask the question of a missing person when they take the call, and that they make themselves aware of the referral pathway. Because I mean, if they come into contact with a veteran that's not missing, they can utilise phase 1 and phase 3. They haven't got to, and to me, that is what the Forcer protocol is, that blanket, not just the online form or the call handler.
Is the follow-on as well.
The whole process basically is what I see as the Forcer protocol. So my understanding, you might be fortunate enough to speak to GMP about this, guys, but it's a 6-month pilot, and not because we've got any doubts about whether it works. It's about, we want to refine that further. so that when we roll with it, we can give the maximum amount of help and advice or complement things that other police forces are already doing in one way, shape, or form, But what I do know is that online form, in terms of the veteran community, I've got loads of messages coming through and just, they're cared about. Thank you for doing this for us, and I think there's a whole veteran community out there that's actually bigger than the current army.
You're looking at around about 14 to 16,000 people leaving a year. I was going to ask Claire, so it's based in Greater Manchester, around the Greater Manchester Police area. How do other people from, say they're in Essex or they're up in Northumbria or Scotland, can they still access it and utilise that?
So anyone can sign up to it, but what actually needs to happen, and again, this is my understanding, that Safe and Found have got a facility where they can do an email kind of to the police force should the police force request that information, and it is stored currently on their
in the database.
Yes, but what actually has to happen, the person that's reporting the missing person, they need to stipulate to that call handler or that force that there is a force protocol in place. So there is a facility currently at the moment, but obviously we haven't got large numbers. So we've got large enough numbers signed up, but there's going to be, we're not at our full capacity where Safe and Found Online is concerned. So I would come back to the type of questions that are unique to a veteran, like my call that was taking place with police. Those questions need to be asked, and they need to get the risk assessment right and make that connection to Op Courage and the veteran services as well, build those relationships there. Sorry to cut you short, because just while I'm thinking of it, suicidal ideation is disclosed, and they veterans might not want to burden their family and friends with that strong suicidal ideation. They might, under one entity be, and I know Alan was on one of their risk assessment modules, he was hitting a 9. His various workers that were working with him, shall we say, were concerned about him and concerned about information not being passed across the board, or it being picked up quickly enough, or him being seen as enough of a severity to speed up that process. So that intel for the police is paramount, particularly with a risk assessment, because that is the phase from taking the call. You've got police officers, bless them, we've inundated with all these missing people from all different genres, and they need to make the right risk assessment. They need to make that right risk assessment, work out who's wandering and just wandering, but who is high risk. As we've said before, I mean, it's a no-brainer, isn't it, really? But then you've got the police sort of taking, so they decide to Section 136 a veteran, and they're dropping off at hospital. I'm trying to work on now engaging, I don't know if that pathway exists or what that looks like, but doing some more work in and around Op Courage being notified there and then, so that Op Courage can, not find out a week later, whatever, which I have heard instances of. So there's all these sort of dynamics, and not only that then frees the police up to go and deal with crime as well. And the veteran, my understanding again is that from a Section 136, they have to wait until there's a Section 2 before the police can actually leave. But my question that's strong in my mind at the moment: at what point is Op Courage contacted? Or could they be contacted sooner to allow the police to go out? And there's been lots of pieces in the news, isn't there, how the police are dealing with issues within the community. But I know that with all those things in place and all those resources in place, it could just be pulled together a little bit tighter. With a bit of communication, we could intercept and prevent quite a lot, because ultimately prevention is ultimately the cure.
It is. So in terms of that, are there any plans for any, I suppose, maybe like webinars, or is there any resource planned in terms of people familiarising themselves with the Forcer Protocol, so that there's maybe a place they can go?
So within the police forces themselves, that the Safe and Found online team, who are obviously missing persons experts, former veterans themselves, kind of thing, they're looking at, well, they're doing a training package.
Brilliant.
I mean, I can't really speak too much to all of that because they're the professionals within that area, and so all I know pretty much is that we want to get this right. We've got a independent evaluation sort of coming in as well, so we're going to get that looked at properly. So it was just get us out the start gate. Let's get the platform. That let's get it written into policy that the call handlers ask, and heaven forbid we get a veteran in Greater Manchester Police. Hopefully I don't want to
it's one of those things you don't want to be used, isn't it, for the best reasons.
But if one of those 7, when we had that kind of little surge viral call signs there, back in October, all those police forces can essentially be equipped with that. And I mean, I have had sort of intel, if you like, that there are other police forces that are wanting to sign on the dotted line.
Okay,
that's brilliant.
That's reassuring.
Well, what we'll do is let us know, Claire. Keep us informed, and the minute any of those resources are available, we'll do a bit to make sure that's out there.
Share the website with the podcast, Safe and online, and maybe sort of Greater Manchester Police kind of, because I cannot sing their praises enough. Those Manchester Police, as I said before, and there was it's overwhelming within every entity, as we clarified earlier, within DWP. There's so many people within various different roles that are so passionate about this subject, so passionate and want to do help within their role. And I suppose that's what it's about, isn't it? You can't take on the world. You have to stay in your lane and deal with what's present in front of you, dealing with that bit by bit. And I mean, as we've been doing that, we've been opening more doors than there was sort of talk a few weeks ago about what goes on when someone goes AWOL. What is the difference between someone going AWOL and with a mental health issue? What happens within the Section 136 where veterans are concerned? Is there a specific pathway there that's designed? What happens when I'm thinking, what happens when social services get involved? Are they identifying whether that is a veteran family and aware of the resources that they can implement for family plan A, B and C? Is
there any key points or anything in summary that you would like to stress to everybody, apart from obviously the obvious, which is Google it, read up about it, find out about it. It's amazing, and you need to know about this. What work's been done within your area?
I mean, as my understanding is, even Samaritans have done quite a lot of work that's veteran sort of specific, but Citizens Advice Bureau, for instance, they're looking to see what the housing associations specific work that because I mean, most of them have joined the Army Covenant and have signed that pledge, which ultimately proves their passion for this particular subject. All the people that come out with their poppies on it, we know that it's a very passionate topic, and we should look after our servicemen and women. We should. And as Ross Kemp said in one of his interviews that he did, 1 a week veteran suicide is too many. And with those simple and techniques, the police could be equipped with, and it wouldn't be an overstretch on their resources. If anything, if they follow this, it can alleviate it long term. They can prevent that person again.
And it allows them to get to that person much quicker, and as a result makes better use of the resources available because of the additional layer of information that they now have access to.
Yeah. I hope that's
wonderful.
Okay. Yeah.
It is.
I mean, I could go all day. I mean, there's lots more. I mean, I could tell you Alan's story from start to finish and all of that, but, I just want to focus at the moment on that because that, that makes me really...
And I think what Rich and I'll do is we'll make sure that in the show notes for this episode there's all the information so that people can go to the Forcer Protocol website, to Safe and Found, to have a look at that process, to maybe sign up and add the information there, because the more information that's there, the safer we make that community.
Yeah, and I'd just like to highlight that it is with the veteran's consent. So anyone on that involved with that veteran, whether it's a family member or even the services, we're looking at creating an account where services can have multiple access points on But you know, I know with Alan, where he was under various different entities, all that paper pushing, they kind of in effect their own little PA. So to get them through that overwhelming stage, to get those financial resources into housing in, to get the payments in, to get the evaluation in. You know, Alan was struggling to get up off the sofa and cook for himself some days. So when they're in that particular phase, obviously we want to encourage independence, and they want to be independent. They don't want to be a burden. You know, they want to be normal and functional, not the word normal. So, and to have someone like that can do that for them, or even suggest, I think it might be a good idea if, I'm a little bit worried about you and I don't think, would you mind if I upload it? Those kind of conversations could happen. And within some of those roles, they have an obligation and a duty of care to do things that, as and make point contact off their own back with the police if they're concerned. As you've sort of spoke about yourself, you had a duty of care to put in that call, but it wasn't taken, from what I gather, with the seriousness that you and I know the catastrophic outcome. So another example. But as I said also earlier, there are lots of positive stories. There are lots of incredible people doing incredible. The communication that takes place on this landscape now is imperative, and it doesn't have to be one big tragedy. There can be lots more positive stories and life transforming things happening.
Things can change.
Yeah, of course they can,
Thank you very much, Claire. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you for creating this platform to discuss such a really important topic.
You're very welcome, and enjoy your time away.
I blooming well will, don't you worry.